before, so you can go ahead and be downloading that project and have it opened up in Unity. When you do, it'll look something like this, super ridiculously simplified 2D game. But before we get into that, while you're downloading it and while it's being set up, I'm going to go through a quick presentation about why you would even want to have a game manager and what a game manager does. And this was something that the intermediate class actually voted on because they were interested in learning about it. So a game manager is basically something like either like a director on a movie set or a referee in like a sports game. There's only one. If you have more than one director or more than one head referee, you're probably going to have problems. This is a job for one person, and that's important to understand. And so a game manager script does things like manage the game state, like tracking, switching between the main menu, playing, pause, game over, transitioning from level to level if you have multiple levels or multiple scenes, resuming a save game or restarting the current session. It saves the player's score, tracks their stats like health and lives, saves and loads the player's progress. It handles upgrades, experience, achievements. A game manager pretty much applies to any type of game you would create, because a big game manager essentially is the thing at the top that is paying attention to, did the player just win the game? Did the player just lose the game? Where's the player at? It can track timers and turns. It can control audio. You might have ability to like mute or change the volume of music or sound effects. Or change the audio, handling settings like difficulty controls, volume, and language. So some of this stuff, like the big stuff, of course, is like the detecting win and loss conditions and triggering appropriate events or switching between UI. But the other stuff will eventually be important. And that includes debug tools. So now the best practices when you're doing this, I'm going to show you something that's called the Singleton pattern. You see, when you're programming games, there's a couple of patterns, things that keep recurring over and over again, and people have said, this happens so frequently, let's give it a name. One of the ways that we create a game manager is by using what is in programming called the Singleton pattern. And as you might expect, a singleton means there's only one. And so when you have something like a game manager or an audio manager or cinematics manager, something that manages a bunch of stuff and there can be only one of that script, it's reasonable to use the singleton pattern. But you don't want to overload the game manager. There's a tendency to say like, oh, well, the game manager handles gameplay, so I'll just put all the gameplay in there. And that's a terrible idea because it becomes one gargantuan script, and if it fails, everything fails. Unity's built on the idea of separating out different functionality into components and adding those components as you need to game objects to give them the ability to do things. So try not to put too much stuff into the game manager. Focus on what it needs to do, which is primarily like manage the high-level game state, the win state, the lose state, updating the HUD is a prime example. So you should only add extra complexity as you grow into needing it. So at first you could have a game manager manage things like audio and stuff, but if audio becomes really huge, you could create a separate audio manager. If you have cinematics in your game, you may initially have the game manager trigger them, but later on you might have a specific cinematic manager. So you can create more of these managers as you need to, but don't start out that way. Start out simple. So those are some examples. Any questions at this point? I'll go into more detail, but like, don't hesitate to be like, I don't understand this concept. What we're doing is there's one of the trickiest things to do when you have multiple scripts that do different things is figuring out how we can make them communicate. So like I said, you don't want to put all of your gameplay into the game manager, but the game manager needs to talk to other scripts. So for example, there's this, you might have seen this, this is the 2D platformer micro game that's built into the Unity hub. Like you can actually find this 2D platformer if you go here into the Unity hub. I think you do new project sample, No learning. There it is. The 2D platformer microgame. So that's literally the example I'm showing you here. And you've got a player who can run around the 2D world, collect gems, stomp on squishy things. Pretty much Mario, early 2D Mario. So you can imagine in this game, you have the player has a player script. The player can collect gems to get points and add to their score. They can stomp on enemies, possibly for points to add to the score. If they touch the enemy, they die and have to restart. If they fall into a hole, like this gap here, they have to restart. And if they reach home, like the flag in Mario, then they finish that level and they go on to the next level. So player script would handle some of that. The gems could have their own script. Then a gem can be collected by the player, and when it does, it plays sound effects and then gets removed or destroyed. It can have different values. You could have pink gems that are have more points than yellow gems. It spins to draw attention. You know, we went over animating. The enemy can have its own enemy script, and the enemy can move on a predefined path. It can be destroyed if the player stomps on it. It can hurt the player if it touches the player without the player stomping on it. So you could have these things talk to each other, and there's all these things that they would need to do. Somebody would need to be responsible for all these different things, but figuring out, well, where do we track the score? How do we update the HUD? Which one of these things does it go in? You could start loading up the player with that kind of stuff. So we got the player control script. We don't want to put it there because we want the player script to just be specific to the things that the player does. So it makes sense for the player's input to be there, and the jumping and their death and detecting collisions with other things and playing the player's specific sound effects, VFX, and animation. But we wouldn't want to put the tracking the score and showing things in the HUD and updating the HUD and moving to the next level, because that's not what the player does. When you create a script, you should think, what does the gem do? Logic for stuff that the gem does goes in the gem. Same for each of these. So you want scripts to be specific to what that object does. So if we're like, oh crap, when you win or lose, maybe you die by touching the enemy, or you fall into a hole or something, or maybe you get to the victory zone, then all of these things start cross-linking. And you wind up with this weird kind of spaghetti mess of like, well, who's in charge of this? And this could happen two different ways. Should I handle player death on the player or on the enemy or in the hole? But this can be a lot cleaner if you have the game manager script and it's responsible to talking to each of these things. And then you get a much clearer way of kind of differentiating and say, oh, these scripts can talk to each other if they need to, but if all they need to do is do things like track scores, update UI, handle player death, handle winning and switching to the next scene, and carrying the score to the next scene, then a game manager script is a prime example of that. And one of the things that happens when you're in a scene in Unity and you finish and you go to the next scene, unless you set things up to persist between scenes, everything is wiped clean and started fresh in the new scene, which is good in some ways. But you want some things to carry forward, like the player's score, like their number of lives, maybe, stuff like that. And that's something that you can have the game manager persist to the next scene. And then it's cool that all these other things reset. It will carry forward the information that is persistent and useful. So what is a singleton? A singleton, when you define a script as a singleton, it makes it really easy for other scripts to access it. Now, you might have in the Unity editor seen that there's different ways to like, oh, I can make a variable public, and in the editor, there's like a place that I can drag and drop, something that I wanted to communicate with. There's lots of ways to get things to communicate. But the singleton pattern is one of the easiest ways, and it's one of the cleanest ways. And this is what it looks like. So when you create a game manager, you say public static game manager instance. So this static word is what makes it a singleton. And then this, you want to make sure that there's only ever one of these. And this is what makes sure that that there's never more than one singleton, because if you accidentally get more of these, it can create a lot of mess. So technically, a singleton is quite easy to define, but making sure that you don't wind up with duplicates, which can cause bugs that are really hard to track down, you use this code. And this is the kind of thing where it's like being able to look in an old project and just copy paste this into your new project. You could even just take a GameManager script from another project, drop it into your new project, clean it up a bit, and you don't have to remember how to do this from scratch. So there's different ways, like I said, there's different ways to create these kind of connections where one script can talk to another. So, for example, if you use serialized private or public, then it will create a place in the editor where you can drag and drop to make a connection from a variable. So that's one way of doing things. You can also use these commands, and I'll go through this a little quick because I don't want to be too technical with y'all. But the point is there's lots of different ways that in script you can try to get a reference to something. That's what allows you to communicate with it. So there's find object of type, and there's get component, and find with tag, transform.find. So there's a bunch of different ways that in script you can get a reference to something so your script can talk to this other script. But some of them, you can't do it dynamically. Some of them are really, really slow, so it's really bad to do it a lot when you're running. You kind of want to do it just once at the start. But a singleton, if used properly, is fast, reliable, and can be used dynamically, which means that if I have an enemy spawner and it creates enemies dynamically during the game, then I can still have them refer to my game manager, even though they were created during the runtime and that they weren't set up in the editor. That's what it means by dynamic. So it becomes something that's absolutely necessary if you're dynamically creating things that need to talk to the game manager. If you have bullets and the bullet flies across the screen and hits something and the bullet tells you, I just shot an enemy or I just shot something, and you want to track that, those dynamically created bullets can talk to the game manager and say, hey, I just shot an enemy, so score some points for that. Or, hey, you're tracking how many shots I can take. And maybe there's a finite amount of ammo, or you have to reload at a certain point. So that's one of those ways. And so so if you have something like, for example, here in GameManager, I've set it up as a static instance. And then, there's the code that makes it so that there can be only one. And I have this score. At the beginning of the game, I set the score to 0. Now I create a function called increment score that's public. So what I can do is in the gem script, like I can say, okay, on the gem script says, okay, when the player enters this trigger, then call increment score on the game manager, then destroy myself. So the gem can say, hey, game manager, the player collected me, so give them 10 points. Okay, bye-bye. And then poof, destroy itself, which is a really clean and straightforward way of doing that. You'll use that kind of process a lot. So why not use a singleton for everything? If there are multiple singletons, all will receive a command sent to any, which can create quite a mess. Like you're trying to kill one enemy, they all die. You're trying to score a point on one gem, every gem scores a point. You want to use a singleton when you need only one of something in the game. It makes sense for everything else to share it. And don't use a singleton when you need many of something like enemies, bullets, coins, NPCs, or if you have multiple players, for example, that having a player be a singleton, if there's going to be multiple players in a game, could really cause some confusing bugs. If each thing needs to have its own behavior or settings. And so let's see. Was that it? I think it is actually. So this is where, yes. So now we can get into the example game. So what I wanted to do with this game is try to figure out, like, how can I create the simplest version of what we kind of saw with that micro platformer game. So what we basically have is exactly the same thing. We have the player, which is this white capsule. We have a gem, which is the yellow diamond. We have an enemy, that's red. We have home, where we want to get to. And we have a HUD that has just the text for score here. And you can see that's, there's a label that says score, and then the value, which is just XXX for now. And so the idea is if we play this, you know, we want to create the same behavior that we saw in the example where, all right, so if I can move left and right here. If I touch a coin, it updates the score. It updates the score in the game manager, which is invisible, but it also takes that score and updates the heads up display, the HUD. But if I touch the enemy, it resets the game and removes, which automatically resets my score. Now, if I collect the gem and then I touch home, I go to the next level, which you can see is level 2. So, and you see that it carried forward my score from level 1. So I still have 10 points that I scored in level 1. So now I can score another point. I can't go on to the next level because there is no next level. But I'll show you how this is set up. Any questions before we start breaking this down? Any questions on kind of the theory or the high level? So let's break down this scene and how it's actually set up. So, you know, I mentioned, all right, so these objects each have their own script. So, you know, because, you know, we're doing a lot with, you know, on trigger enter. So, but you can see that home has a script called home. Enemy has a script called enemy. Gem has a script called gem. And player has a script called player. We have some ground and the camera that stays fixed. And then our game, this is the game manager here. I actually put, one of the things that I tend to do is, you know, you can create a UI by creating a canvas that has a panel. So this is a canvas. And what I do is I put my game manager script on the canvas for my HUD. And it's because those things are so connected that it's easy, you know, you could put it on a separate game object if you wanted to. But one of the things that this game manager does, so this is a UI canvas. And here, just for those of you who weren't here last week, if you want to create a UI, you do like UI, you could click canvas, but what you want is not only a canvas, but a panel as well. Actually, this is, that's a bad example because, let me show you in a new scene, like just a basic scene. So if I could do UI panel, you see it automatically creates a canvas, and the panel is under a canvas. And so what you tend to do is have multiple panels, like one panel for the HUD. If I do another panel, this could be a panel for the the pause screen. And then I could do another panel for the windscreen. So each one, and what you can do, you know, each one of these would have images and text underneath it. But what you do is you hide the windscreen, you hide the pause panel, and then you have your game manager, which you'll put on the canvas here. Will turn these on, show these and hide these as you need them. So if the player presses pause button, it will activate the pause screen, and that will be there. It might even hide the HUD when it does that, which is a pretty common thing to do to keep it from looking too busy. So if we go back to this scene, level 1. So this is our canvas, which has a HUD panel, which has just the text score and text label. Now, you don't see this here because it's actually, if you zoom way back, the way Unity works with UI is it puts the lower left corner of the UI at 0, 0, 0 in your world, which can be a little confusing. But so to work with UI, you actually need to zoom way back in order to actually see it. An easy way to do that, if I'm here and I'm zoomed in on the enemy and I want to mess with the HUD, if I click one of these and press F in the scene, it'll scroll to roughly that. So you see under my, I have this HUD and I put this label for the score and the value of the score there. And since I have my game manager, and my game manager wants to update that value of what the score is. And so my game manager, if we open it up, needs a public reference to that. So you see, I have public text mesh pro UI score. So that's the thing that is here. And then I take this and I drag and drop it there. So you see, that's how I've made a connection between my script and the text component. As I mentioned, that's one of the ways of doing that. And so I have the score, but that's the text that's the text field for the score, but I actually have to keep a integer variable for the score in GameManager to track it. You remember we talked about variables. So what happens is when the game starts, the score is set to 0. And then anytime something calls increment score, it adds whatever number is sent to that function to the score, and then it updates the text in the HUD. And so when you see something like score plus equals add score, that's the same as score equals score plus add score. You could write that just the same and it would be fine. So our game manager has this public function. This game manager is a static instance, and it has functions for increment score, it has function for player died, and it has function for player reached home. So in other words, like when these things happen in another script, that script can say, hey, game manager, the player died. And so what the game manager says is, cool, if the player died, then I set the score to 0 and I update the HUD text, and then I call scene manager load scene to reload the scene. And by reloading the scene, that's starting over. That's a common way of handling the player dying. Whereas if the player reached home, I say reload the scene, the next scene. So this is a way of saying this scene, and then if I add 1 to it, I'm saying the next scene, which is just a programmatic way to make it so that this is reusable code. Like that means that this game manager, no matter how many levels you have, no matter how many scenes, this you can always call player reached home and it'll say, okay, whatever scene I'm in, go to the next scene. The other thing that is important here, this line here, it isn't part of what makes it a singleton, it makes it the only one. This is what makes sure that it makes sure that the game manager script and the game object that it's attached to don't get cleared out when you go to the next level. They actually go to the next level and persist. That's what don't destroy on load is. And I'll show you how this actually works. So because the game manager has don't destroy on load, I'm in level 1, and here's the game manager. The game manager, this is the canvas, and I called it game manager, and I have the game manager script on it. And since these are children, they're all considered part of the same thing. So now if you watch this thing, so when we start the game, you'll see the game manager disappeared from here. That's because it's no longer part of level 1. It's now part of don't destroy on load. There it is. And so if I increase my score and then I go to the next level, it's still there because what's here in don't destroy on load doesn't get destroyed when the next scene loads. And so that means that I don't have to recreate the HUD in level 2, because when I start in level 1, the HUD, in fact, all the UI and the game manager script is always going to follow the player forward in the levels. Very common way of handling this. And so my recommendation to you is that you can use this project and refer to it and think about, like, you could either literally copy this GameManager script. Like if you click on something in the projects folder, you right click on it and click show in Explorer, it take you to that, literally that file. And if you could literally like copy this file and go to a project that you've been working on and paste it into, like, for example, for me, all of my Unity projects are here. So if I was working on a 2D platformer and I wanted a GameManager script, I go into Assets, Scripts, and just, paste this in there. And then, when I go back to Unity and open it up, it's there, and it's something that it might have some errors, but this is such a simple script that it's easy to fix those errors. Like it might say something, it might complain about, if you don't have Text Mesh Pro, it might complain about that, or it might say like, oh, like, actually, I don't think it has references to anything such that it would give any errors. Because, of course, a script that's here in your project isn't going to be used until you actually put it onto an object in the hierarchy. Then it's part of the level and it will be loaded and things will run. Cool. Any questions about that?
I have missed when you put when you connected the text variable to the HUD.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that again?
Oh, sure, absolutely. And in fact, what we'll probably do is, let's see, none of y'all were here last week, right? You were here last week.
Here, yes.
Yes, okay. My memory is totally crap, by the way. But what we might do is actually go through that, because we didn't actually connect that. We created a example UI, but we didn't connect it up. So we'll do that as well. But I'll show you first what we're talking about, which is that if I have a script and I want to make something that I can connect in the editor, then what I do is I type public and something like whatever type it is, like, game object, or in this case, we want to have the text mesh UI, text mesh pro. It's kind of a mouthful, but the variable type for a text mesh pro text object is text mesh pro u GUI. So that's what this is. So you say public, you say the type of variable, whether it's a text mesh pro UI, where it's an integer, whether it's a game object, whatever you are trying to connect, whatever you want to get access to, and then give it a name. So for example, now if I go back here and I go to the object that script is on, then this shows up there, and I can find the thing that I want to put in it, and I drag that thing over here. But let's do that. Let's start from, so for you, Awen, you can just open up the project that you were working on previously. But for everybody else, what we'll do is we want to create a new, let me close this, start from a new project and choose a universal 3D project. And, you could just call it like, UI, for example, whatever, something that reminds you that this was a project where we worked on UI. And then what we'll do, once this comes up, we'll add the starter assets first-person controller to it, which will give us not only the first-person controller, but a playground scene that we can use to try things out. So Awen, for you, this will be kind of a refresher, and then you'll do the things that we went through in the last class over again, but repetition is good. So let's just make sure we get people moving forward by go to your package manager. So you may have if you downloaded the starter assets first person controller before, you can just find it in My Assets. But if not, then what you might want to do is instead go to the Unity Asset Store, and you can just type in, if you type in starter assets, I think that it'll be one of the first things that comes up. So we have the third person controller and the first person controller, and we want the first person. I mean, technically you can pick either one. For this example, like for example, you Felix, you're welcome to do the third person one instead, because it really doesn't, whether you choose one or the other is not important. So I'm going to go with the first person one, and then click import to project. Expect to install upgrade, no big deal. Yeah, I know, working on my own 2D platformer project, I remember one of the problems I encountered was when you jump and hit something on the side, you didn't jump onto the platform, but you hit the side of the platform, that it wasn't behaving the way I wanted it to. Like I would either kind of stick to it, or like, there's a lot of fine details about like, okay, when sometimes you stick to you hit a wall like that, and you kind of stick to it, or you float up for some reason. One tip is that you really have to decide. There's two ways to approach movement in 2D like that. One is by doing just like translating, which literally means in X, move positively or negatively, right? And that's just like math, just straight up like vector math. The other approach is using physics, which physics can be more interesting and very tweakable, but it's more complex and can be harder to debug. So you either should be doing all your movement through physics or all your movement through translation, but don't mix the two, because they don't work well together. Like if you're having like, oh, your player is all physics-based, but your enemies are moving by just translating. Or, oh, I'm doing a physics-based jump system, but my platforms move by just translating, and I want the player to be able to stand on a moving platform and have it move back and forth. That's not going to work very well at all. Like you need both the platform to move by physics and the player to move by physics if you want to have moving platforms, which I highly recommend not doing moving platforms until you have other things, because there's some things that seem like they would be easy and they turn out to be really hard. Things like moving platforms, things like doors, things like climbing a ladder, like all kinds of stuff that like is deceptively hard. All right, so is anybody still looking to get their first person controller or third person controller set up? Oh, it's loading? Okay, cool. Yeah, once you do, in your project, you should have a starter assets folder. And this will either say first person controller or third person controller. So when you get in here and you find starter assets, go to first person controller or third person controller, and then scenes, and double click the playground scene. So this is a nice little starting place for us to set up our HUD. And the first thing, of course, to do is just to click play and see if you can walk around and see if it's not broken. Because it would really suck to build a lot of stuff only to realize that actually the whole thing was broken before you even got started. So it should be the case that when the game is running, that you can look around, that you can move with the WASD or the arrow keys. Chances are you can jump with space. You might even be able to run by holding shift. And there's some stairs here. Even kind of a little foggy in the distance. And so what we want to do, it's kind of nice having this playground scene to refer to, but we want to make our level 1. And so what we want to do is there's already a scenes folder in assets. If we do file, save as, and then go to that scenes folder and type level 1 as the name for this. So that way we don't mess with our playground scene. It's still there if we ever want to go back and refer to it. If we create a mess here and we want to go back to our like kind of clean slate starting point, we can still go back to playground. It's also hard to get to playground way down here in scenes. It's kind of nice to have the scene that we're working on right here in assets. And so what we're going to do is, the first thing we're going to do is we have some extra stuff here that we really don't need. Let's go ahead and get rid of it. You see this thing here, UI Canvas Starter Assets Joystick, it's currently disabled. If you enabled it using this checkbox here, you'll see that what it does is it puts these mobile controls for movement and jumping and stuff in here. But this isn't going to be a mobile game, so we don't need that. And so what we can do is we can get rid of that by clicking here and click delete. And let's go ahead and remove this event system that came with it, just because I want to show you that that event system is something that you're going to get automatically when you put a canvas into the scene. So now you've got lighting, environment, camera, player capsule. And so we can go ahead and save that. So one of the first tips that I'm going to give anybody when working with UI early on is that usually what happens when you have a Unity project in the game window, it's set to free aspect. This may be set to free aspect. It may be set to 16:9 or something. But if it's in free aspect, this is going to give you a headache, because what happens is when the game window is set to free aspect, no matter what dimensions you create, it adapts to those, which is not how your player's not going to experience the game like this or like that. And that's going to get real confusing really fast. And when you work with UI, it gets even more tricky, because it's really the easiest way to set up your project to make working with UI easy is to decide on a fixed aspect ratio. For example, like nowadays, probably one of the most common aspect ratio, I mean, not just aspect ratio, but resolution, my bad. One of the most common resolutions right now is full HD, 1920 by 1080, which is a 16:9 aspect. You know, if you set it to 16:9, then it'll scale. It'll keep it'll keep the same dimensions, but it'll shrink or grow depending on the window size, which you would think would be good, but it does complicate UI a bit. If you want the least complicated way of approaching UI, which is best when you're learning, pick one of these, and I recommend 1920 by 1080. And you might need to adjust the scale so it fits in the window here. So now you know exactly the dimensions of, and so this is essentially the target size, target resolution that your game will be. Now, eventually you'll make your game so that they adapt to whatever screen resolution the player has, or they do 2K or 4K or whatever the hell. But there's things that get more complicated when you try to make UI fit to a very different aspect ratios and screen sizes. So that's the first thing. And if you want to do a resolution that isn't here, you can actually add your own pretty easily. So you can see I've added resolutions for like 1026 or for working on my Samsung phone or stuff like that. But these are the built-in ones. So now that we have set up our game window, so that we want our game window to be visible at the same time as our scene, because as we add UI, you'll actually see it here in the game window. That's one of the easier ways to see it update, and that's really useful. So here in the hierarchy, we're going to create a right-click, click UI. We can click Canvas, but what we want is the panel that is under Canvas, because we just have to add a panel to it. I mean, you can click Canvas and then add a panel to the canvas, But it's easier to just do those both at the same time by doing UI panel. Because as mentioned, you'll have multiple panels. So it's a good idea to call this one panel HUD, because that's what we're going to be building right now. So you have a canvas, and you have the panel that's for the HUD. You'll also see that it automatically added this thing called event system. Now don't delete that, that's super important. This event system is how it detects clicks, like a mouse clicking a button. So we need that. No, it was created automatically. So if I delete it, if I delete the canvas, go back to where we started, when I click UI panel, you see I got the canvas, the panel, and the event system. That's probably why. So it's okay if you already have the event system. That's kind of why I had you delete them at the start. But yeah, as long as you have an event system, you're okay. So yeah, you should have lighting, environment, main camera, follow camera, capsule. These are if you have the third person, might be a little different. And so we have our canvas here and our event system. What I tend to do, because my canvas, you can actually move things in the hierarchy up and down. And what I like to do is I like to put my canvas all the way at the top and the event system, because then they don't get lost. Because to me, these are the highest level things. And like I said, the game manager is going to go on this canvas object. Or you could create its own thing if you really wanted. But so now you have a canvas and a panel. And you might have noticed that if you look at your game window, it kind of looks like frosted glass here or something. And if you zoom out, you'll see this something similar from the, when you zoom all the way out to where you can see the UI. And that's because this panel comes with an image on it, which is useful just to know that the panel's there, but we don't actually want to use it. You could remove it, or you can just check this box to turn it off. And so we're going to keep things simple, and we're just going to have a single thing in our panel, which is the score. We'll actually create two things, actually. So we'll do panel, with the panel selected, right-click on it, and click UI Text Mesh Pro. And then name it like text score. But you might not even get a chance to do that before the TMP importer says, hey, you're trying to use a Text Mesh Pro thing and you don't have it installed. I don't know why they don't make this standard, because it's pretty standard now. But it's easy enough to fix that. You click Import TMP Essentials. That's all you need to do. So now I can rename this thing that I just created. I tend to leave the text as a preface. So text score. And you can see that in our game window, you can see the text there. It's in the center of the screen. Now, if we kind of zoom around the HUD here and get close to it, it's going to be a lot easier to work with our UI and our HUD if we click on the kind of the negative Z axis, the gray part of the Z, and that'll lock us into this view. And then if we click this thing that says back, it'll switch from perspective view to isometric view. And that just helps make it easier for us to position things and move them around in this area. So that is, if chances are you're orbiting around, you click on the gray Z axis, and then go to isometric view by clicking this. So you can see it says new text. You see where it says back and has, if you're in perspective, you'll see 3 lines kind of coming to a triangle. If you click that, it'll switch it to 3 lines in parallel. So the parallel means you're in isometric view. This means you're in perspective view. And it's very common to switch between these two when you're going around trying to look at things, measure where they're at, etc. You can actually technically click the thing in the middle and it does the same thing. It switches between perspective and isometric. Sometimes you'll accidentally do that. Now, if you zoom in, you see you've got this text in the middle of your game window, and if you zoom in your scene, you'll see, chances are you have the rect tool selected because it automatically goes there. If you don't, you'll select it. You'll see you can still use the move tool, the rotate tool, the scale tool. Those all work here. But this rect tool, which you can actually use on 3D objects and stuff, is actually made for and very useful for working with UI elements. And you'll see, with the rect tool selected, I have these 4 blue dots in the corners, and there's this yellow outline, and there's these white boxes. Now, this is the first point of confusion, is the yellow line and these white boxes aren't part of the rect tool. It's actually part of the text and how you specify the padding around the text. And one of the first mistakes people make is they think they want to make more room for their text, and they'll grab this white box and they'll drag it out. Now you can see that the yellow box is different than the white box. If you are dragging out the yellow box, if the yellow box is on the outside of the white box, then you're probably going to have problems. Because when you start to change things, it's not going to work as you expect. So what I'm going to recommend is that you try to avoid clicking on these white things and the yellow. You won't actually be able to move the yellow. If you click on anything but those white boxes, then you're moving the text, the box that the text lives in. And so, the thing is, it looks like, okay, well, all right, I see that now. It's almost like if you ever worked with like Google Slides or PowerPoint, the text is kind of similar, right? So you have this text box that the text can live in, but then the text doesn't automatically fill it most of the time. You have to change the font size to make it bigger to fit the text. And you also can change the alignment to be like in the center, top to bottom, and left to right. That's the proper way of working with text. Now, one of the things you really don't want to do, for example, is if, like, let's say you're looking at your text, you're like, I want the text to be bigger. And then so you're like, I'll go to the scale tool and I'll make it bigger. That's a bad idea, because what'll happen is at a certain point, the text will get these like jagged edges, like the aliased edges, because you're essentially blowing up something that's small. It'll be the smaller the font size is, and the more you do that, the more obvious it'll be. So when you want to, if you want to make your text bigger, the thing to do is to say, all right, if I think about how big I want the text, and then make the box that contains the text to be roughly that size. Now you see I'm dragging out from the lower right corner, and it stays anchored in the upper left. But if I hold down Alt, it'll center, which can be really useful. So if I'm like, okay, I think I want my score text to be pretty big. So what if it's like that big? And now what I do is I increase the font size to fill it. That's going to keep the text crisp. So you always want to make the font size bigger. You don't want to scale up the object itself. And then, if I want it to be centered left to right, of course, you probably don't want to do a lot of changes here until you actually put in the text itself, so that you have an idea of how big the text is. Now, what I recommend, if you're going to have something that says score, colon, and the number, you could in script update just this text to say that, but something that's simpler and easier to line up and to make look good is if you separate those two things. The word score, colon, will never change. What changes is the number that's next to it. So what I recommend is you can have score here, and then you can take it and you can use the move tool to move it up and to the side slightly, for example. And then I would rename this, for example, like text underscore score underscore label. So I call something, if the text doesn't change, I'll call it label. And then for the text that changed, I'll call that value. So what I can do here is I can take text score label, if I hit Control D, or if I just right click it and click duplicate, then I've created a copy of it. You don't see it because it's right on top of it. And I'll name that text score value. And what I'll do is I'll make that XXX, or however many digits I expect the score to be. And then I scoot that over next to it. So now I don't have to worry about this changing. I only need to change this to the value of the score. And it's actually easier to, if you want it to be like slightly different or like different font or spaced out differently, it's much easier to control that way. Now there's something that I could have done better here. And so it's important to understand something called anchors. We're a little past midpoint. Does anybody need a break? Bathroom break? Moment to catch up? Anything? Yeah, I mean, you're welcome to. I mean, you have seen this once, and so you're welcome to take a break. Marcia, you need any help?
I have a yellow thing.
I think that's because you have your widgets turned off.
I knew
Gizmos.
it was something, but
Yeah. So yeah, you won't see this if you don't have your gizmos turned on. Mm-hmm. You somehow made which invisible? The text?
Yeah, the structures.
Oh, I think you're zoomed. So what you want to do is you want to click this. You see the thing there? Yeah, click that, and then click the middle, the square. All right, now zoom back. Can you scroll back? So what you want is this box here. You want to get that up over here. Do you need to borrow a mouse? Would it be helpful?
Yes, please.
Oh yeah, I got one, and I'd be glad to help you. Yeah, much easier to do stuff with the mouse. So here's the dongle that goes in your USB. Okay, so now if you use your scroll wheel, there's where it is. And then let's see, you have this thing turned on. Oh, I see. If you click this, now you see the yellow and all that. And then here's your rect tool, which is the best way of. I mean, generally you're going to use both the rect tool and the move tool.
But how do I see like this buildings?
Oh, well, there are tiny stuff over there. So if you wanted to do that, you'd actually have to zoom, which the easiest way to do that would be to like click environment and then press F. Oh, try pressing again. There you go. So yeah, having to jump between like the tiny little environment and then the big UIs can sometimes be a little time consuming. I have no, that's a very good question. Like not only why is it so huge and also why is it anchored in that way? Because sometimes it's like overlapping things you're trying to do. Some people will build their entire world off to the side so they don't have to deal with that. You can also hide your UI. Yeah, you could move the entire environment out of the. Oh, you mean no? You can't move the. Yeah, you can't move the canvas. It will. It is locked at 0, 0, 0. That's why if you look at the canvas and you look at its rect transform, all this stuff is grayed out, so it won't let you move it.
I also practice to not build everything at 0, 0, 0, or like your final form, because you want like do some 3,000 or something.
It can be, there are pros and cons. So yeah, it can be useful to have things at 0, 0. Although actually, you, the best way to look at 0, 0, 0 in the world is actually, you're right, which is 0, 0, 0, often crazy stuff happens there or things wind up there. And it can also be useful to have 0, 0, 0 be like a staging area for setting things up. So building your entire world off to the side. And that way, you know, anything at 0, 0, 0, you're like, oh, well, that's where I set up a prefab and make it a prefab. So that is actually a really good point.
I have one more
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so,
please.
is it possible if you're spawning something like that, for instance, can you, some easy way, like chop it up into multiple small cubes? That is the
Mm.
main.
Well, so you can procedurally chop up geometry like that, but it's not simple. What I would do, like, there's a way, you know, you can always ask yourself, if something's complicated, is there a way I can fake it? So, for example, if you had a cube and you wanted the player to hit that cube and it turned into like 4 smaller cubes, you could have 4 smaller cubes that are actually like, you know, children of that. And when you hit the parent, you actually hide it and you see the 4 smaller ones under within it. And you could even have them kind of separate or fall off or something like that. So for example, like Minecraft, for example, being a voxel world, you'd think it's cubes all over the place, but it's not. It's empty space. And so when you break something, at that point, it hides or removes that face and creates or draws the faces of the interior of the thing. And so you can procedurally create and change things. You probably wouldn't literally subdivide a cube in that way. You would take and remove the procedural cube and replace it with 4 smaller procedural cubes. But you could do that with prefabs too. But it kind of, I think the point is, what do you want to accomplish by doing this? And understanding that, we could talk about, well, what's the best method for doing it. So is there something like, so what would you be doing? Is this something the player would hit to break it into pieces, or?
No, it's, I'm just like trying that. So,
Mhm.
like one
Mhm.
simple structure, then you can't really.
Are you talking about during runtime when the player's playing? Are you talking about like while you're building
No,
in the world?
it's not while the player is
Mm-hmm.
it's beforehand. Like,
Mm-hmm.
another example is like spawning a wall.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't
Uh-huh.
I don't know how to do that.
You're talking about when you say spawn in, are you saying when you make it in the editor?
I mean,
Yeah, uh-huh. So like those are the kind of things that you can do with, for example, with Pro Builder. You know, like where we were like, you know, doing some of that. Although, you know, what does this really well is Unreal, because Unreal has this stuff called BSPs, which is a way of like quickly creating, you know, even complex geometry in the level, and you can do stuff like that really easily, and it's built in. If I was doing that in Unity, I would probably use Pro Builder and like think of like, okay, well, what's the primitive thing that I would build up onto? It's easier to add to something 3D than to subtract from it, although you can. For example, tomorrow night I'll be showing the intermediate students some basics of using Blender. And so for things like that, where you're cutting shapes out of other shapes, it's much easier to do that in Blender and then like export the FBX model and bring it into Unity. But there's a lot of things you can do with Pro Builder in Unity in terms of quickly building things up, stuff like that. So that can be useful. What I just showed you here is that, you know, we created these 2 things and we scooted them up to the top. You might have noticed that there's this kind of funny kind of X here in the middle. So that's called an anchor. And the way that the position of a UI element is calculated is based on its distance from that anchor. And so, for example, when I switch to the rect tool, if I click and drag things around, you can see this in action. You see how it calculates that. Now, that means that, like, for example, if we were to adjust the width and height of this, that these things would say the same distance from that center because they're anchored to the center. But a lot of times with UI, you don't want something necessarily anchored to the center. You might want the reticle on a gun, that if it's always going to be in the center, to be anchored there. But for example, a lot of times, like, the score might go in the upper right corner. And if we want it to always stay there, no matter how scaling changes, it's better for us to make this anchor the upper right corner. And so the way that we change that is by selecting the object. So for example, text score value. If we look in the rect transform component here, this thing here, this visual thing here, this is what sets the anchor. So if I click this and I click this upper right corner here, you see that that thing moved up over here, this fan looking thing. Now, if I click and drag this, you see that it calculates its distance based on distance to the upper right corner. And so if I anchor both of these things to the upper right corner, and it actually helps me kind of snap them to being, like, you know, on the same at the same y value, etc. So now it wouldn't matter how I change, like, left, right, up. So this is the kind of thing that's just a good habit to get into. We set our resolution to a fixed resolution so it will be less noticeable, but understanding, like, okay, do I want these UI elements to be anchored to the upper left corner or the upper right corner, or the center, or the middle center, or the bottom center? So you see all of those things are here. There's even something that you can, if you want to take this a step further, when you click on this, you'll see it says Alt also set position. So that means if I click Alt and click here, it snaps it up into that corner. So that'll change its position and its anchor at the same time. So now I can say, okay, there. So that's what I'm looking at. So now we have our heads-up display. And let's see. Why don't we try what I talked about before, which is if we were to go and find our the project that we were just working on, the thing that you downloaded. Remember that it has a GameManager script inside the scripts folder. So why don't we just kind of copy that and use the functionality for that rather than creating this all ourselves from scratch. So if you find it in Asset Scripts, find GameManager.cs. You don't have to worry about the meta files. You might not even see them if you have show hidden, unless you have show hidden. But we copy it, and then we go over here. And I don't think we can paste it here, but I think if we go to, let's see, in Assets, we might want to go ahead and create a folder for scripts. And we create it, open it, and then when we right-click and do Show in Explorer, we can open it and paste the file there. You could technically, I think you could even, like, if you had the other folder open, you could probably drag and drop it from there to there. So, but the point is, you've taken that Game Master script and you put it in this current project, and when you click back into the Unity, it'll take a moment to compile it, and it's there. And there's no immediate errors. Of course, it's not actually hooked up to anything yet. But what we can do is, if we click our canvas, we might need to collapse some of these components so that we can see the bottom area, and then drag the GameManager onto our canvas. And we already have a field for text HUD score. And so we can take that text score value and we can drag that here. So now what happens is if we double click GameManager, this GameManager script has a function for increment score. So if we create something that calls increment score and send it the value we want it, then it should keep track of that score and it should update our UI. So now, let's go ahead and press save. Now what we want to do is we want to create a quick and dirty way of collecting something in our level. You know, we could try to copy a script from the other project, but that project was a 2D project and we're working in 3D. We can still refer to that, but it'll be slightly different. But let's go ahead and see if we can do this kind of from memory. If we zoom into our scene here, or if you just click, like, for example, your player and press F, here we are in our scene. So we just want to create an object that the player can collect, the equivalent of a coin or a gem. And when we'll create a script for that, because it should have its own script, and the script for that collectible, we'll call that function in GameManager. So let's start by, in the hierarchy, what we want to do is we want to create a 3D object, and let's just create a sphere. And we'll call this coin, for example, or gem, or whatever you want to. So, and then the other thing we can do is, let's see, I think that we can, so our coin sphere already comes with a sphere collider, so that's good. But we don't want it to collide. We want to change it so that it's a trigger. So when we click the isTrigger property on the sphere collider, now the player won't bounce off of it. Instead, when he touches it, we'll be able to have a script detect that. Let's see, I think the other thing I was going to do is maybe go to the material here. It uses this lit material. And I think that actually, let's create our own material just to give it a different color, because gray doesn't look very appealing. I'm not sure I want to collect that. So if you right click on assets and create a folder, call that materials, and then go into it, right click and click create material, and we'll say, call it like coin material. And then if we drop it on our coin, we can change this by clicking this base map, like the white portion here, and switch that to light yellow. And you see it's still in the white part of this box, so we'll drag it over here. So now we've got a very appealing looking yellow coin. I can even see it in my game window if I move it over in front of my player. I can get a sense for how high it is. So I want the player to be able to collect that. It looks a little big for me, so I'll make it a little smaller. So now we have our coin game object. It's using its own material. It has a collider that's set to isTrigger. So now we just need to create a coin script. Because if right now, we could even test it and say, like, well, what I expect will happen is I start the game. Oh, look, our GameManager script is already doing something. It changed the value of score to 0. So that's good to know. And if I walk forward, I can walk right through the coin, which is okay. That's what I'd expect because I changed the collider to isTrigger. So what I need is a script that can detect when I touch this, call that function on the GameManager to increment the score, and then destroy the coin so that it's collected. So let's go to our scripts folder, and we'll create a new script by right-clicking and clicking Create Mono Behavior Script. And I'm just going to call this coin. For some reason, it switches over to Visual Studio, which I don't really need because I need to double click the coin script and have it open up. So we don't actually need anything to happen during start or update, so we can delete the code that's there. So now we have just the empty class for coin. And so what we know is, okay, I need to detect when the player touches the trigger of the coin. So if I type on trigger, you see I get on trigger enter 2D, on trigger exit 2D. So there's 2D specific versions, but we're in 3D. So we want to select the first one and hit tab. So now you see it says private void on trigger enter, and it receives the collider of the thing it touched. So the first thing to do is say, well, let's just do a debug log and say coin collected to see if this works before we do a bunch of other stuff. Because there are reasons why sometimes it can be tricky to detect when two things collide because there are rules. Luckily, our first-person player controller or third-person player controller is already set up so that it has everything that it needs on the player side, I think. We're about to find out. So the other thing is once you've typed that, if there's a star here next to this, you haven't saved it yet. Make sure you save it or else none of those changes will be reflected. So when you know you've saved your coin script, we go back to the editor, we select our coin object, and we got to put our coin script onto our coin object. Doesn't do us any good if it's not on the coin. So you select your coin game object in hierarchy, drag your coin script onto it, and it appears here. So now my coin has got coin script. The other thing I need to make sure of is like, well, this debug log is going to print to the console. So I should be able to see the console. And I don't want the game window to take up the full screen. So before I start, maybe I want to save because that seems pretty smart. Now what we're expecting is when we walk into that yellow ball, we should see that debug log's print to the console. And there it is. So it's a message, and so you'll see the 1 increment there, and you see it said coin collected. So anybody find that they're not getting the debug log statement printing? Because that would be the first indicator that something's not right.
I'm trying to figure out how to get the console to show.
Uh-huh.
I'm trying to remember how to, because I have a game, I'm just working out how to add like a thing to see the console.
Let's see. Try clicking window. Was under panels? That's weird. What I would do is I would reset your layout. So click layout here, and then do 2x3, like that, or default will work too. Let's see. Try doing default. All right, so there's console. Now drag it so that it's kind of over. There you go, right there. And then take the game window and drag it so that it's next to the console. Perfect. All right. And you might have to zoom back out your like the scale there. Try dragging that. Oh, you're in free aspect. Click free aspect and switch that. You can put it on. Yeah. And now drive the scale back. There you go. Cool. All right, so you should have a debug statement in your console. So that means that, all right, so we're a step in the right direction. If I hit Control P, that's one of the ways I can stop play mode. So now, what we want to do is we want to take advantage of our GameManager. Now, if we're working with 2 scripts, there's a trick in Visual Studio that can make this a lot easier. which is you can take one of your scripts and pull it from this tab. And if you put it over this thing here, you can have them side by side, which can be really useful. You can even do control and middle mouse scroll to be able to see more of it. And the thing that I'm wanting to see is just a reminder of what I called this GameManager instance and what I called this increment score function, because that's what I want to call here. So the way that I refer to an instance is first by the name of the script itself. So I start with GameManager. Then I type instance. And then I can type the function name. So GameManager instance is how I refer to that singleton. And once I've done GameManager.instance dot, then I can find any of the functions that are on that script. So these are all the things you can find if you scroll through all this. So, and you can, what was it we called increment score? So increment score is there. But even if you forgot it, you can just look here and say, okay, well, the function I'm wanting to call is increment score. And then if you start to type increment there. Now the thing is, you see, increment score requires that you give it the amount that you want to add to the score. So player died doesn't require you to give it anything. But increment score, if you tried to just do increment score parentheses, it would give you an error. And that's because it's expecting an integer that you're going to add to the score. So that's a nice way that that function is flexible. It means it can work for however you want to. If you change the score or whatever, you wouldn't have to go change it there. You could change it here. So if I want my my coin to be worth 10 points, then I would do increment score 10. So we can leave the log statement in there if we want, or we could, if you didn't want the log statement to appear, sometimes if you have log statements for a bunch of stuff and you're not really using them, they just make the log really cluttered and make it hard to see the things that are important. So it's important to clean up your log statements if you're not using them. You could delete the log statement, but if you ever think you'll need it again, one way to keep it there but not have it show up is to do this to comment it out. Those 2 forward slashes in front of something will make everything that comes after it commented out, which can be kind of useful because you might need to debug this later. And so 2 forward slashes comment something out. Now there's one more thing we need to do here, which is, okay, we increment the score, but then we need to get rid of the coin itself. So then, and what you do, the way you do that is by calling the command destroy. And it needs to know, well, what do you want me to destroy? And you can say this.gameObject. So what you're saying is, when I say this, I'm referring to this script, the coin script. But if I were to just say destroy this, it would remove the script, but the game object would still be there. And that's the game object is like the sphere, with its mesh renderer and its mesh, physical mesh and its transform component. So if you really want to get rid of the whole thing, you need to say destroy this.gameObject. Technically, you don't need the word this, but for me, it helps me remember what's actually happening. I'm referring to this game object, the game object that this script is on. So now again, we've made changes. We need to make sure to save them. So now we have something that we should be able to test. So if we go back here, and we've got no errors, which is good. At least I've got no errors. I don't know about you. But now, so start with score of 0, walk up to this ball, collect it, score is 10, and it's no longer there. Yeah.
It's a small thing.
Yeah.
What is the difference between lowercase game object and uppercase game object?
Oh, right. Well, in coding, there's a big difference between lowercase and uppercase is two totally different things when it comes to coding. Like every specific matters, like whether it's a dot or a comma or uppercase or lowercase. And so, but I think you're probably referring to like why these things are uppercase, or like a game object. You might have something. You might say game object and it turns green and it's uppercase. But then there's also game object lowercase. And those are two different things. Uppercase and green means I'm talking about like the idea of a game object. A game object in general as it applies to everything, whereas this is talking about a specific game object. So that's one of those things that, yes, it is distinct.
See, so like game object is the uppercase game object is like a variable, like when you are setting a variable.
It's a variable type.
Yeah.
So so you could call something game object. It'd be a really bad idea, but like game object, my game object equals blah. So you're saying this is a variable, and you could name it whatever you want. You can name your variable. It's smart to name them intelligently, but you could name it gobbledygook. But this type, so you can have a game object. This says the thing called my game object is a variable of type game object, just like the thing called other is a variable of type collider, or here the variable add to score is a variable of type integer. Integer isn't uppercase, although you're like, well, shouldn't it be? But that's just because this is a keyword that is general to all of C#, whereas game object is specific to the Unity version of C#.
And the lowercase game object is.
Yeah, in this one, in this case, yeah, lowercase game object refers to the game object that this specific instance of a game object. Although it is plenty weird, I'm sure. Like there are some exceptions and stuff like that, but always, yeah, there's a distinction between the two. The colors help you a little bit too. So this is referring to of the type of thing called GameManager. There is a variable we called instance. You could have named that lowercase, I think. Some of these are just conventions that help things make it easier to read, and for programmers, they see something and they know, oh, that's probably this. Now, one of the other things we can do now that we have a coin, one of the cool things that we can do is we can make it a prefab. So if we click on assets and we create a folder called prefabs, if we open it and then if we take and drag our coin in here, our coin now becomes blue and it's a prefab, which means that it's almost like creating a mold or a template. I can now create duplicates of that, which means that I can take this coin and I can do Control D. Actually, I can do a couple of them. And I can drag them out and I can put them in various places. And now I've got not just one coin that the player can collect. I got multiple coins, and each one will give plus 10 points to player's score. So it's kind of like making a tool or creating something. Once it's a little complicated to make the tool or the thing that you're going to use, but once you do, if you use it intelligently, it's reusable. So I can go around. Now I can design a level around collecting these coins, each one of which adds to the player's score, and it's really easy to duplicate them, and I can duplicate them as much as I want. And I can even go to the next level. If I created a new level, I don't have to go in and create the coin all over again. Like if I create, new level, level 2, and I drag this coin in there, it's still there and it can be placed in the world. So it's something I can use throughout the whole rest of my game once it's a prefab. Cool. Well, we've got just about enough time that I can show you a quick and easy way to make your start scene. So a lot of times, you want to have your game start out with like a nice scene and a button that says start, and then you go to the first level. So what I like to do, especially in a game jam when you're strapped for time, is whatever level you've been working in, you're like, that could be pretty cool as my starting scene. You could create a static 2D image for your start screen. Um, but if you're lazy like me, what I do is I'll take a level that I'm working on, I'll do save as, and then go to scenes and call this start. And then you don't want there's things you don't want in here. Like, okay, this canvas with the game manager and stuff like that has the HUD. I'll get rid of that. Take the event system with it. I don't want the player to be in there because the player can control the player. But I'm going to leave the camera, I'm going to leave the coins, I'm going to leave the environment and the lighting. Now, if I position the camera someplace interesting, let's see, maybe I want something that makes it I want my game to look interesting and enticing to the player. And so what I've just done is I've created a 3D scene here that's going to be the background for my start screen. And so what I can do now is I'm going to save that. And now if I do create a UI again, just like we did before, and it'll have a panel, because you never really add things directly to a canvas, you add them to a panel. But this panel, I'll ditch the image on it. I'm going to do under panel, click UI and text, and then I'm going to call this like text title. I use rotate and move. You still have a play or follow camera in there. Ditch that too. Yep. If that was problematic, you'd always delete that as well and then replace it with a regular camera. So I've got my camera set up. I added a canvas that has a text to it, and I'm going to say this is my awesome game. And then again, we're going to want to go to the -Z, isometric, scroll back. Let's see. Oh yeah. There's a quick way to zoom, which is like holding down Alt and right mouse button. And so then if I take this, make it large, center it top to bottom, and increase the font size, my awesome game. I do want that anchored to the center. A trick to make this white text look even better is to go down here to where the material is for the text mesh, the text, and just check outline. And you can adjust the thickness to make white text stand out better on the black background. Of course, if you really want to make it look good, import a new font and use a more interesting font. Like the fonts, we only have this Liberation font that comes by default. But you can import your own fonts and make this look really cool. Oh, let's see. I think it'll work, but what you want under, I would say delete that text title and right click on canvas, and now to go do UI panel. All right, and then just hit enter. Well, the text is actually going to go under that. So the panel is essentially just an empty container. Now click on UI and then text. There you go. So yeah, it's kind of weird, but yeah, canvas is the entire UI space. The panel is an empty container for whatever goes in that panel, and then you put the things underneath it. So you have your text title there. We're going to put one more thing in this panel, which is we need a button to go have the player move forward. So click UI and button. And then you can name it like button start. And you can see, this is one of those times when it would be really tempting to just scale this up. But again, that's not a great idea. The thing to do is to make the button itself bigger and then go to the text and scale up the font. Maybe call it start. A button? Uh-huh. So what you do is you start by right-clicking on your panel, go to UI, and button is here roughly in the middle. It's a button text mesh pro. And so you can position the button wherever you want. And you can, like a lot of times they're over here in the lower right or whatnot. Maybe you anchor it to the lower right. So the thing is that in order to go to the next level, let's see, the cleanest way to do this is to have its own script that goes to the next level. Technically, you have the code for this in your game manager. Your game manager is capable of moving to the next level when it does player reaches home. But let's not have that used in our. We'll technically use this code, but using the game manager to do this here, we're probably more likely to introduce a bit of confusion. So let's create a script that is going to be used just here in the start scene to allow this button to go to the next scene. So if we right click on scripts and click create model behavior script, and I'll just name it start scene. And once it compiles, double click start scene. And so we don't need start or update here. What we do need is a public function that we can call when the button's pressed. And so if we do public void start game. So the public part means other scripts can easily reference it. Void just means it doesn't return any value. It doesn't need any arguments. And then what it's going to do is the same thing that this player reaches home thing does. So we can actually copy that from Game Manager. So if I Control C, Control V, now it's going to say, oh, Scene Manager is a problem. It's because I don't have using unity.scene management up here. But if I put my mouse over here, that's actually something it'll do for me. So in order to have access to this library function, I have to add the library up here. So what it should do is it should get the active scene and then say, take me to the next scene after that. So for that to work, we've got to do maybe one more step. But let's go ahead and get this set up. So what we do is here in start, much like I do with the game manager, I'm going to put this start scene on the canvas because this script has to be on something in here. And to me, it makes sense to put it there. Now, the way we make a button call a function from another script, it's fairly easy. If you click on a button, you'll see that if we collapse these other components, there's a button component, and it has an area here that says on click. This is what's called an event. And there's a bunch of things, especially in UI, that are capable of doing something when an event occurs. This is for an on click event. So right now there's nothing in here, but if we click the plus, we get the ability to drag and drop an object here, which will allow us to find a function that exists on that object. So if I drag our start script is on this canvas. If we drag that there, now if we click here, you can see the start scene component, along with all the other components that are on there, can be accessed. And I can say start scene, start game. Mm-hmm. Yeah, wherever you put the start scene script, you'll drag that into that button field. So I put it on canvas. Although you could have put it on an empty game object, you technically could have put it on anything in here. It'd be a bad idea to put it on something that might disappear. It's kind of just where it makes the most sense to you. But yeah, on button start, you do that, you add something to the on-click, drag canvas to this first point where this is the object that will have the components that you're looking for. And then here's all the components on that game object. And then for start scene, our function that we're looking for is here in start game. Now, if we save it and we try to run it, there's going to be a problem. But actually, we may get some information from a warning. So if we click on the start button here, we do get an error. And it says, scene with build index 2 couldn't load because it's not been added to the active build profile. To add a scene to the active build profile, do what I'm about to show you. So it actually gave you pretty good information about why it didn't work. This is something that you just have to get used to learning about how it works when you have multiple scenes and you want to move from one to the other. Which is, if you, for your project, for this Unity project, if you go to File, Build Profiles, you know what a build is. A build is when you want to make your game into something players can play. You'll make a Windows build, or if it's going to be on phone, you'll make an Android build. You could even make a WebGL build and put it on a web page. So here in Build Profiles, you see we're making a Windows build, which is the default. And this scene list, this is where any scenes that you want to include in your game have to be in this scene list. They need to be in order as well. And so the only thing in there right now is this sample scene, which is the one thing we're not using. To modify this, we need to open the scene list. Now if we click here and hit delete, get rid of that. Now we can click add open scene to add, since our start scene is open, click this and it adds it there. But we need not just the start scene, we also need level 1. And it's actually, we don't have to actually open level 1. If we click scenes here in the project and drag level 1 up here, so you can move these, and order them. You might have a bunch of scenes, but you need to make sure that what you want to come first comes first, then what comes second, then what comes third. So this was what caused that error. We got to have all of the scenes that we want to be in our game here, or else they won't be included in the build, which is good because if you have a bunch of test scenes and gyms, you don't want that in your build. You only want the things that need to be in the build listed here. So now I can clear my console and that goes away. So now when I press the start button, I'm hoping that it should go to level 1. And it does. And my UI works. So now you kind of know a quick and dirty way of creating a start scene. You know how by separating our start scene from our first level and our second level and our third level, we can use this scene manager code to go from one to the next. So at this point, so we kind of special cased going from the start scene to the first level. But from here on out, we would have our game manager move to the next level, and we would have it do that by calling the function player reached home. So if you're supposed to, in this hypothetical game, if you're supposed to collect all the coins and then you can get to a point where you've finished the level, when you collect all the coins, that could say, hey, players collected all the coins. They're now allowed to step through the door to the next level. Then you could make the door open, because you know how to animate doors now. And then you could have the player step into a trigger. That trigger could call GameManager.instance.playerReachedHome, and it would load the next scene. And because the game manager is set to don't destroy on load, it will follow the player to the next scene along with the HUD that it's attached to, and the knowledge of how much score they've accumulated. Questions? This is probably the most complicated thing you've seen yet. And of course, you'll have the video. Which one? Animation was complicated. Well, I'll put the video up, of course, and so you can revisit the video. You have the scene, the project that you downloaded, so you have the code. I don't remember this stuff. Like when I need to create a new game, I've done it a dozen times. I still have to ask ChatGPT or go into like an old project and dig up the code because it's not easy to remember this stuff. But there's tricks for, you can even get to a point where you put this kind of stuff into Visual Studio and then just say, you've got a shortcut for creating a singleton or a shortcut for creating a game master or something. So it can become easier along the way. Cool. So the plan for next class, of course, is that you're going to work on your final project, bring it in, and then what we'll do is we'll play test it. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's just an opportunity for you to get some early feedback that can let you know, like, is this a problem? Did I even see this as a problem? Stuff like that. And then you'll have something that you can improve on. And then, as I said, you don't have to wait until next week to get feedback from me. Don't hesitate. If you get stuck, if you want to throw some ideas around, if you want recommendations, or if you want tips on a starting point or any of that, don't hesitate to ask me, because that'll help you have something further along next class. And then at the end of next class, what we did last year and we'll do again this year is go out for some pizza or something. We'll pick a place nearby and just go out and have a dinner to wrap it all up. Cool. Any other questions? Awesome. Thank y'all.
Sorry.
No. Oh, well, you've got 1 minute.
It was a small thing. You mentioned this before. You might not have the time to fix it now.
Yeah.
How would you, when you go from the start scene to the main one, how do you get rid of the mouse?
Let's see. So that's actually something that's built into the first-person controller. But there's specific code that does it. And so if you were creating your own controller for a very simple game, one of the things that I would do is, so for example, I actually did this very recently. It's like, all right, in Unity 6, how do I hide the mouse cursor when the game is playing? And so it'll tell you the actual, so cursor.visible equals false, hides the cursor, and cursor lock state locks the cursor. And it says you can put this in start or enable. And of course, it'll also try to keep you engaged by saying, let me know if you want me to create some functions for you or script or whatever. So yeah, so this is an example of it being in start. One of the things that's a smart thing to do is chances are in your game, you'll sometimes want to hide the cursor, but then you might want to show the cursor again when you go, for example, into pause. So like, if I'm playing my game, I don't want to see the cursor, but if the player pauses, now I need them to see it so they can click on buttons. So what I would do is make this its own function, like void hide cursor, and you have this stuff. Then you have another one that says void show cursor, which makes cursor visible true, and lock state cursor mode. I think there's one of these is like unlocked or free or something. So if you create two functions that one will hide it, one will show it, then you can call those functions anytime you need. And so that's a smart way of arranging things. But in general, the best thing to do is learn how to ask ChatGPT in a way that it will tell you a useful answer. For example, by telling it I'm using Unity 6, it knows I'm on the new input system or something like that. So, but yeah, that's pretty invaluable. It has its limits, don't get me wrong, but like especially for things that you could search the internet, but it's so much quicker to just have something like ChatGPT or another LLM to tell you. Especially for Unity, because there's so much Unity information out there that the answers that come from a large language model are usually pretty good. Cool. See y'all next week.